IBM presents You Make the Call.
Welcome to the second episode of You Make the Call, the series from the other coast, where we look at corner cases in the rules for Malifaux 3rd edition. My name's Jim, but I go by Diceman87 on the forums, and today I'm going to talk to you about blast markers. Yes, blast markers. One of those things that I think a lot of us take for granted in the game. We're going to be looking at pages 28, 30, and 31 of the digital rulebook that's available on Weird's resources page. To start, let's make sure we understand what we're talking about. So what is a marker? Capital M. Markers are defined in the rules on page 28, and in part, they are stated to not count as terrain and have no vertical distance. They do not impede movement unless they have terrain features, like your underbrush markers. And important for this discussion, markers cannot be removed from the table or destroyed unless an effect states otherwise. Markers come into play in one of two ways. They're capital D dropped or capital C created. The differences between dropped and created we'll save for another time. For purposes of today, we're going to be remembering that capital D dropped is a specific game term in relation to markers that are capital M. On page 30 is where we talk about blasts, and we start to get into some really funny territory real quick. The rules that describe how blasts work refer to them as the blast icon. They just have the little picture of the explosion. And they define it in the rules as a 50mm base. So in the rules text, they're not actually calling them a capital M marker, blast marker. But then you look at the bottom of page 30, and there's this call-out box. It's got Iggy and Pandora, and it's talking about how Rasputina hit Iggy and the blasts are being placed so that Pandora is also hit. And in that part, they do call them a blast marker with a capital M. Okay, so now we're calling them a marker. Well, let's go one more page real quick. Page 31. The rules for shockwaves. They read very similar to the rules for blasts, except for this one particular line near the middle of the page which says, when the shockwave action is fully resolved, the marker is removed. You know what doesn't have a line that says the marker is removed? Blasts. So we have the rules text a little confused, but there is a portion that calls it a capital M marker that is capital D dropped. Rules is written, this implies that a blast marker stays on the table after the action is resolved. And you keep adding blast markers to the table with every blast that you resolve as part of your actions. It doesn't do anything. It has no terrain traits. It doesn't block line of sight, doesn't block movement. So it doesn't seem to be a big deal, right? Well, yes and no. Because in 3rd edition, we have a lot of actions, abilities, and now schemes that have interactions with markers. Not specific kinds, but just markers. For example, Mancha Roja can pick up a marker to gain a bonus on his attack actions. Mali can remove a marker to draw cards. If blast markers stay on the table, suddenly all these actions and abilities that remove generic markers gain a whole new resource that they may not have had before. Or consider the scheme research mission. Research mission requires you to put markers on the table of different types. Well, a blast marker is an attack action, so if you're killing a model and dropping a corpse or scrap, and a blast marker right next to it, suddenly crews that would have a hard time doing research mission, like Sonia, if a blast marker stays on the table, because it is a marker, capital M, that is dropped, capital D, it will not be removed unless an effect states otherwise, and the core rules don't say that you remove the blast marker. Well, let's hold up, okay? So yes, those are all true statements, as best as I can understand from the rules. But let's get practical here. The rules text for blast markers calls them blast icons. Does not use the word marker outside of that call-out box. So it's hard to say whether a blast icon truly is a marker or not. It's a little unclear from the rules. And realistically speaking, if every blast action left a marker on the table, you'd need like 30 of the things to get through a game. What are you going to do? Just run out of 50mm markers? That's a little absurd. And from a gameplay perspective, it seems like, from the shockwave example, that when an attack is a temporary thing, place the shockwave marker to resolve the action and then remove it, it would make sense that the blast marker would also be removed by the resolution of the action, because it's only there to determine who's hit by the attack. If you're casting a fireball at somebody, you don't have fireball that doesn't do anything, just kind of floating in space after the fact, right? A blast action is like shotguns, they're just targeted, as opposed to a shockwave, which is an area of effect that is not targeted. So is it reasonable to assume that blast markers are meant to be taken up? I think so. I think it's fair to say that when you call it a blast icon and a 50mm base in the core rules, you're trying to indicate that you're not leaving the marker down, but you do use the capital M marker in that callout box, and that's where the confusion happens. It doesn't have a major effect on the game after the fact, except for these corner cases. And practically speaking, it's unwieldy and leaves a cluttered table, and nobody likes that. So, that's the point about blast markers that we wanted to talk about today. Listeners, tell us what you think. Do you think I'm crazy, or do you think I have a point? How would you play this in your local meta? Why don't you come into our Discord channel or on our Facebook page and let us know? You could leave a comment or two, and heck, if you want to keep hearing our weird rules interpretations, why don't you like us or subscribe? Or if you're feeling very generous, we do have a Patreon or a PayPal. We're trying to bring different aspects of the Malifaux community to the greater discussion, and we'd appreciate your input. So until next time, this has been Jim with The Other Coast.